Section 6 of National Geographic Magazine, Volume 1, Number 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marianne Spiegel. Across Nicaragua, with Transit and Machéte, by R. E. Peary, Part 1. The action of this National Society, with its array of distinguished members, in turning its attention for an hour to a region which has interested the thinking world for more than 3 centuries, gives me peculiar pleasure and satisfaction. I propose this evening to touch lightly and briefly upon the natural features of Nicaragua, to note the reasons for the interest which has always centered upon her, to trace the growth of the great project with which her name is inseparably linked, to show you somewhat in detail the life, work, and surroundings of an engineer within her borders, and finally to show you the result that is to crown the engineer's work in her wide-spreading forests and fertile valleys. That portion of Central America now included within the boundaries of our sister republic Nicaragua has almost from the moment that European eyes looked upon it attracted and charmed the attention of explorers, geographers, great rulers, students, and men of sagacious and far-reaching intellect. From Gomara the long list of famous names which have linked themselves with Nicaragua reaches down through Humboldt, Napoleon III, Ammon, Lull, Menachel, and Taylor. The shores were first seen by Europeans in 1502, when Columbus in his 4th voyage rounded the cape which forms the northeast angle of the state and called it Gracias a Dios, which name it bears today. Columbus then coasted southward along the eastern shore. In 1522, Avila penetrated from the Pacific coast of the country to the lakes and the cities of the Indian inhabitants. Previous to this the country was occupied by a numerous population of Aztecs, or nearly allied people, as the quantities of specimens of pottery, gold images, and other articles found upon the islands and along the shores of the lakes prove conclusively. In 1529 the connection of the lakes with the Caribbean Sea was discovered, and during the last half of the 18th century a considerable commerce was carried on by this route between Granada on Lake Nicaragua and the cities of Nombre de Dios, Cartagena, Havana, and Cadiz. In 1821 Nicaragua threw off the rule of the mother country, and in 1823 formed with her sister Spanish colonies a confederation. This confederation was dissolved in 1838, and since then Nicaragua has conducted her own affairs. In point of advancement, financial solidity, and stability of government, she stands today nearly, if not quite, at the head of the Central American republics. Nicaragua extends over a little more than 4 degrees each of latitude and longitude from about north 11 degrees to north 15 degrees, and from 83 degrees 20 minutes west to 87 degrees 40 minutes west. Its longest side is the northern border, from the Gulf of Fonseca northeasterly to Cape Gracias a Dios, 290 miles. From that cape south to the mouth of the Rio San Juan, the Caribbean coastline, is 250 miles. Nearly due west across the isthmus to Salinas Bay on the Pacific is 120 miles. The Pacific coastline extends thence northwest 160 miles. In point of size Nicaragua stands first among the Central American republics, having an area of 51,600 square miles. It is larger than either the state of New York or Pennsylvania, about the size of Denmark, Belgium, and the Netherlands and Switzerland combined, and is 1/4 as large as France or Germany. Its population numbers about 300,000. The Gulf of Fonseca on the northern and Salinas Bay at the southern extremity of the coastline are 2 of the finest and largest harbors on the Pacific coast of Central America. About midway between them is the fine harbor of Corinto, and there are several other ports along the coast, at San Juan del Sur, Brito, and Tamarindito. On the Caribbean coast no harbors suitable for large vessels exist, but numerous lagoons and bights afford the best shelter for coasting vehicles. The central part of Nicaragua is traversed from north to south by the main cordillera of the isthmus, which, here greatly reduced in altitude, consists merely of a confused mass of peaks and ridges with an average elevation scarcely exceeding 1,000 feet. Between this mountainous region and the Caribbean shore stretches a low, level country covered with a dense forest, rich in rubber, cedar, mahogany, and dye woods. It is drained by several large rivers whose fertile intervales will yield almost incredible harvests of plantains, bananas, oranges, limes, and other tropical fruits. West of the mountain zone is a broad valley, about 125 feet above the level of the sea, extending from the Gulf of Fonseca southeasterly to the frontier of Costa Rica. The greater portion of this valley is occupied by two lakes, Managua and Nicaragua. The latter 110 miles long by 50 or 60 miles wide is really an inland sea, being one half as large as Lake Ontario and twice as large as Long Island Sound. These lakes, with the rainfall of the adjacent valleys, drain through the noble San Juan River, which discharges into the Caribbean at Greytown at the southeast angle of the country. Between the Pacific and these lakes is a narrow strip of land, from 12 to 30 miles in width, stretching from the magnificent plain of Leon, with its cathedral city, in the north, to the rolling indigo fields and the cacao plantations which surround the garden city of Rivas in the south. The lowest pass across the backbone of the New World, from Bering Strait to the Strait of Magellan, extends along the San Juan Valley and across the Lejos Rio Grande divide between Lake Nicaragua and the Pacific. The summit of this divide is only 152 feet above the sea and 42 feet above the lake. Nicaragua presents yet another unique physical feature. Lying between the elevated mountain masses of Costa Rica on the south and Honduras on the north, the average elevation of its own mountain backbone hardly 100 feet, it is the natural thoroughfare of the beneficent northeast trades. These winds sweep in from the Caribbean across the Atlantic slopes, break the surface of the lakes into sparkling waves, and then disappear over the Pacific, aerating, cooling, and purifying the country, destroying the germs of disease, and making Nicaragua the healthiest region in Central America. The scenery of the eastern portion of the country is of the luxuriant sameness peculiar to all tropical countries. In the vicinity of the lakes, and between them and the Pacific, the isolated mountain peaks which bound the plain of Leon on the northeast, and the mountain islands of Madeira and Ometepe, the towering turquoise masses of the Costa Rica volcanoes, and the distant blue mountains of Segovia and Matagalpa, visible beyond the sparkling waters of the lakes, feast the eye with scenic beauties, unsurpassed elsewhere in grandeur, variety, and richness of coloring. The products of the country are numerous despite the fact that its resources are as yet almost entirely undeveloped. Maize, plantains, bananas, oranges, limes, and indeed every tropical fruit, thrive in abundance. Coffee is grown in large quantities in the hilly region in the northwest. Sugar, tobacco, cotton, rice, indigo, and cacao plantations abound between the lakes and the Pacific. Potatoes and wheat thrive in the uplands of Segovia. The Chontales region east of Lake Nicaragua, a great grazing section, supports thousands of head of cattle, and back of this are the gold and silver districts of La Libertad Valley and others. Numerous trees and plants of medicinal and commercial value are found in the forests. Game is plentiful and of numerous varieties. Deer, wild hog, wild turkey, manatee, and tapir, and fish abound in the streams and rivers. The temperature of Nicaragua is equable. The extreme variation, recorded by Childs, was 23 degrees, observed near the head of the San Juan in May, 1851. The southeast wind predominates during the rainy season. Occasionally, in June or October as a rule, the wind hauls round to southwest, and a temporal results, heavy rain sometimes falling for a week or 10 days. The equatorial cloud belt, following the sun north in the spring, is late reaching Nicaragua, and the wet season is shorter in regions farther south. The average rainfall, based on the records of 9 years, is 64.42 inches. The trades blow almost throughout the year. Strong during the dry season and freshening during the day, the wind comes from the east northeast and blows usually for 4 to 5 days, when, hauling to the east or southeast for a day or two, it calms down, then goes back to northeast and rises again. The Spanish discoverers of the great Lake Nicaragua, coming upon it from the Pacific and noting the fluctuations of level caused by the action of the wind upon its broad surface, mistook these fluctuations for tides and felt assured that some broad strait connected it with the North Sea. Later, when Machéte had discovered the great river outlet of the lake, and the restless searching of other explorers in every bay and inlet along both sides of the American Isthmus had extinguished forever the ignis fatuus, secret of the strait, Gomara pointed this out as one of the most favorable localities for an artificial communication between the North and South Seas. It was not until 1851, however, that an accurate and scientific survey of a ship canal route was made by Colonel O. W. Childs. This survey, which showed the Lake of Nicaragua to be only 107 feet above the sea, and the maximum elevation between the lake and the Pacific to be only 41 feet, exhibited the advantages of this route so clearly and in such an unanswerable manner that it has never since been possible to ignore it. In 1870, under the administration of General Grant and largely through the unceasing efforts of Admiral Ammen, the United States began a series of systematic surveys of all the routes across the American Isthmus, from Tehuantepec to the headwaters of the Rio Atrato, and 6 years later, with the plans and results of all these surveys before it, a commission composed of General Humphreys, Chief of Engineers, U.S. Army, Hon. Carlisle Patterson, Superintendent U.S. Coast Survey, and Rear Admiral Daniel Ammen, Chief of Bureau of Navigation, U.S. Navy, gave its verdict in favor of the Nicaragua route. The International Canal Congress at Paris, in 1879, had such convincing information placed before it that it was forced, in spite of its prejudices, to admit that in the advantages it offered for the construction of a lock canal, the Nicaragua route was superior to any other across the American Isthmus. In 1876, and again in 1880, Civil Engineer A. G. Menocal, U.S.N., the chief engineer of previous governmental surveys, resurveyed and revised portions of the route, and in 1885 the same engineer, assisted by myself, surveyed an entirely new line on the Caribbean side, from Greytown to the San Juan River, near the mouth of the San Carlos. On the eastern side of Nicaragua, all these surveys, except the last, were confined almost entirely to the San Juan River and its immediate banks, and the country on either side beyond these narrow limits was, up to 1885, almost entirely unknown. Between Lake Nicaragua and the Pacific, however, every pass from the Bay of Salinas to the Gulf of Fonseca had been examined. In 1885, the party of which I was a member pushed a nearly direct line across the country from a point on the San Juan, about 3 miles below the mouth of the Rio San Carlos, to Greytown, a distance of 31 miles by our line, as compared with 56 miles by the river and 42 miles by the former proposed canal route. In December 1887, I went out in charge of a final surveying expedition, consisting of some 40 engineers and assistants and 150 laborers, to resurvey and stake out the line of the canal preparatory to the work of construction. The information and personal experience gained in previous surveys made it possible, without loss of time, to locate the various sections of the expedition in the most advantageous manner, and push the work with the greatest speed consistent with accuracy. The location lines of the previous surveys were taken as a preliminary line and carefully remeasured and re-leveled. Preliminary offsets were run, the location made and staked off upon the ground. Offsets run in from 300 to 100 feet apart, extending beyond the slope limits of the canal, borings made at frequent intervals, and all streams gauged. The result of this work was a series of detailed charts and profiles, based upon rigidly checked instrumental data, and covering the entire line from Greytown to Brito, from which to estimate quantities and cost. As may be imagined by those familiar with tropical countries, the prosecution of a survey in these regions is an arduous and difficult work, and one demanding special qualifications in the engineer. His days are filled with a succession of surprises, usually disagreeable, and constant happenings of the unexpected. Probably in no other country will the traveler, explorer, or engineer find such an endless variety of obstacles to his progress. Every topographical feature of the country is shrouded and hidden under a tropical growth of huge trees and tangled underbrush, so dense that it is impossible for even a strong, active man, burdened with nothing but a rifle, to force himself through it without a short, heavy sword or machete with which to cut his way. Under these circumstances, the most observant engineer and expert woodsman may pass within 100 feet of the base of a considerable hill and not have a suspicion of its existence, or he may be entirely unaware of the proximity of a stream until he is on the point of stepping over the edge of its precipitous banks. The topography of the country has to be laboriously felt out, much as a blind man familiarizes himself with his surroundings. In doing this work the indispensable instrument, without which the transit, the level, and indeed the engineer himself is of no use, is the national weapon of Nicaragua, the machete, a short, heavy sword. As soon as he is able to walk, the son of the Nicaraguan mozo or hulero takes as a plaything a piece of iron hoop or an old knife, and imitates his father with his machete. As he gets older a broken and worn down weapon is given to him, and when he is able to handle it a full-size machete is entrusted to him, and he then considers himself a man. From that day on, waking or sleeping, our Nicaraguan's machete is always at his side. With it he cuts his way through the woods, with it he builds his camp and his bed, with it he kills his game and fish, with it at a pinch he shaves himself, or extracts the thorns from his feet, with it he fights his duels, and with it, when he dies, his comrades dig his grave. When in the field the chief of a party, equipped with a pocket compass and an aneroid barometer, is always skirmishing ahead of the line, with a machetero or axeman to cut a path for him. A pushing chief, however, speedily dispenses with machetero and slashes a way for himself much more rapidly. As soon as he decides where the line is to go the engineer calls to the macheteros, and the two best ones immediately begin cutting toward the sound of his voice. They soon slash a narrow path to him, drive a stake where he was standing, and then turn back toward the other macheteros who have been following them, cutting a wider path and clearing away all trees, vines, and branches, so that the transit man can see the flag at the stake. The moment the leading macheteros reach him the chief starts off again, and by the time the main body of axemen have reached his former position, the head macheteros are cutting toward the sound of his voice in a new position. As soon as the line is cleared the transit man takes his sight and moves ahead to the stake. The chainmen follow and drive stakes every 100 feet, and the leveler follows, putting in elevations and cross sections. In this way the work goes on from early morning until nearly dark, stopping about an hour for lunch. After the day's work comes the dinner, the table graced with wild hog, or turkey, or venison, or all. After dinner the smoke. Then the day's notes are worked up and duplicated, and all hands get into their nets. For a moment the countless nocturnal noises of the great forest, enlivened perhaps by the scream of a tiger or the deep, muffled roar of a puma, fall upon drowsy ears. Then follows the sleep that always accompanies hard work and good health, till the bull-voiced, howling monkeys set the forest echoing with their announcement of the breaking dawn. In reconnaissance and preliminary work the experienced engineer is able, in many cases, to avoid obstacles without vitiating the results of his work, but in the final location, in staking out absolute curves and driving tangents thousands of feet long across country, No dodging is possible. On the hills and elevated ground the engineer can, comparatively speaking, get along quite comfortably, his principal annoyances being the uneven character of the ground, which compels him to set his instrument very frequently, and the necessity of felling some gigantic tree every now and then. In the valleys and lowlands there is an unceasing round of obstacles. The line may run for some distance over level ground covered with comparatively open growth. Then without warning it encounters the wreck of a fallen tree, and hours are consumed hewing a passage through the mass of broken limbs and shattered trunk, all matted and bound together with vines and shrubbery. A little farther on a stream is crossed, and the line may cross and recross 4 or 5 times in the next 1,000 feet. The engineer must either climb down the steep banks, for the streams burrow deep in the stiff clay of these valleys, ford the stream and climb the opposite bank, or he must fall a tree from bank to bank and cross on its slippery trunk 20 or 25 feet above the water. Either on the immediate bank or in its vicinity is almost certainly to be encountered a saccade clearing. This may be only 100 or 200 feet across, or it may be half a mile. In the former case, the saccade grass will be 10 or 15 feet in height and so matted and interwoven with vines and briars that a tunnel may be cut through it as through a hedge. If the clearing be large, the tough wiry grass is no higher than a man's head, and a path has to be mowed through it, while the sun beats down into the furnace-like enclosure till the blade of the machete becomes almost too hot to touch. But worse than anything thus far mentioned are the silico or black palm swamps. Some of these in the larger valleys and near the coasts are miles in extent. Occupied extensively by the low, thick silico palms, these swamps are in the wet season absolutely impassable except for monkeys and alligators, and even at the end of the dry season the engineer enters upon one with sinking heart as well as feet, and emerges from it tired and used up in every portion of his anatomy. It is with the utmost difficulty that he finds a practicable place to locate his instrument, generally utilizing the little hummocks formed by the trunks of the clusters of palms, and in moving from point to point he is compelled to wade from knee to shoulder deep in the black mud and water. General reconnaissances from high trees in elevated localities, simple enough in theory, are by no means easy in a country so miserly with its secrets as this, nor are their results reliable without a great expenditure of time, labor, and patience. On level, undulating, and moderately broken ground, the tops of the trees, though they may be 150 feet from the ground, are level as the top of a hedge. Even an isolated hill, if it be rounded in shape, presents hardly better facilities. The trees at the base and on the sides, in their effort to reach the sunlight, grow taller than those on the summit, and there is not one tree that commands all the others. If, however, an isolated hill of several hundred feet in height be found, its steep sides culminating in a sharp peak, one day's work by 3 or 4 good axemen, in cutting neighboring trees, will prepare the way for a study of the general relief and topography of the adjacent country. If after these preliminaries have been completed the engineer imagines that he has only to climb the tree and sketch what he sees, to obtain reliable knowledge of the country, he is doomed to serious surprises in the future. If he makes the ascent during the middle of the day, he will, after he has cooled off and rested from his exhausting efforts, see spread out before him a shimmering landscape in which the uniform green carpet and the vertical sun combined have obliterated all outlines except the more prominent irregularities of the terrene, and have blended different mountain ranges, one of which may be several miles beyond the other, into one, of which only the sky profile is distinct. Naturally, under these conditions estimates of distance may be half or double the truth. There are 2 ways of extracting reliable information from these tree-top reconnaissances. If it be in the rainy season, the observer must be prepared to make a day of it, and when he ascends the tree in the morning he takes with him a long light line with which to pull up his coffee and lunch. Then, aided by the successive showers which sweep across the landscape, leaving fragments of mist in the ravines, and hanging gray screens between the different ranges and mountains, bringing out the relief first of this and then of that section, an accurate sketch may gradually be made. The time of passage of a shower from one peak to another, or to the observer, may also be utilized as a by no means to be despised check upon distance estimates. If it be the dry season, the observer may take his choice between remaining on his perch in the tree from before sunrise to after sunset, or making 2 ascents, one early in the morning and the other late in the afternoon. In this case the slowly dispersing clouds of morning and the gradually gathering mists at sunset, together with the reversed lights and shadows at dawn and sunset, bring out very clearly the relief of the terrene, the overlapping of distant ranges, and the course of the larger streams. This kind of work cannot be delegated to anyone, and besides the arduous labor involved in climbing the huge trees, there are other serious annoyances connected with it. The climber is almost certain to disturb some venomous insects, which revenges itself by a savage sting which has to be endured. Or he may rend clothes and skin also, on some thorny vine, or another, crushed by his efforts, may exude a juice which will leave him tattooed for days. Then, though there may not be a mosquito or fly at the base of the tree, the top will be infested with myriads of minute black flies, which cover hands and face, and with extremely annoying results. On the other hand, the explorer may as a compensation have his nostrils filled with the perfume of some brilliant orchid in a neighboring branch, and there is a breezy enjoyment in watching the showers as they rush across the green carpet, and in listening to the roar with which the big drops beat upon the tree tops. A special phase of field work which fell to my personal lot was entirely reconnaissance, consisting of canoe examinations of all streams in the vicinity of the line of the canal, to determine their sources, character of valley, and approximate watershed; of rapid air-line compass and aneroid trails, to connect one stream or valley head with another, or furnish a base line for a general sketch plan of a valley; and of studies of the larger features of the terrene from elevated treetops. This last has been already described. In the second, the experience was very similar to that of the parties in running main lines. On these occasions 3 or at most 4 hardy huleros (rubber hunters) comprised the party, 2 carrying the blankets, mosquito bars, and provisions for several days, and 1 or 2 cutting the lightest possible practicable trail and marking prominent trees. In a day's march of from 5 to 8 miles, and this was the utmost that even such a light, active, and experienced party could cover in one day, every possible and some impossible kinds of traveling was encountered, and thoroughly exhausted men crept into their bars every night. The canoe reconnaissances were more agreeable, though some most unpleasant as well as most enjoyable memories are connected with them. The innumerable large fallen trees which obstruct the streams and over or through which the canoe must be hauled bodily, the almost inevitable capsizing of the canoe, the monotonous red clay banks on either side, and the frequent necessity of lying down at night in a bed of mud into which the droves of wild pigs which inhabit these valleys have trampled the clayey soil, are among the disagreeable incidents. From the head of canoe navigation to their sources the character of these streams is entirely different, and both in 1888 and in 1885 I have followed them far up into the mountain gorges, the beauty of which is as fresh in my memory as if I had been there but yesterday. The crew of the canoe on these reconnaissances usually consisted of 3 picked men, and when the canoe had been pushed as far upstream as it was possible for it to go, 2 of the men were left with it while the third and best, slinging the blankets, bars, and a little coffee, sugar, and milk upon his back, pushed on with me. Wading through the shallow water up the bed of the stream, taking bearings and estimating distances, while my hulero followed, ever alert to strike some drowsy beauty of a fish in the clear water, the source of the stream was generally reached in a day. And never did we make preparations to sleep on some bed of clean, yellow sand washed down by the stream in flood times, but what I had a plump turkey hanging from my belt, and my hulero several fine fish. Section 7.